So we have a session today called Collaborative Database Development with SAP HANA Cloud. I'm Volker Saggau, part of the HANA product management team, and with me is Zwickel. We have 2 hours, 1 hour with which I'm conducting, and the second hour is done by Jan. You have to have had loaded registered for a HANA trial and have spinned up your HANA. If you haven't done that yet, please just follow the session. It will take too much time to speed up. It will take some time to get the HANA up, and we directly start with coding. So if you haven't done that yet, please then review the session when you have a spinning HANA. Because otherwise you will just miss too much and will just get in jeopardy there.
Hello,
yep,
also from my side, I'm Jan Zwickel. And also just to reinforce what Volker has said, I mean, this session is recorded and the material is available. So if you have not prepared the trial instance yet, you can also follow the session using material afterwards. And the session is, by the way, also linked below this streaming window. Thank you. Over to you, Volker. Sorry.
Yeah. No worries. So you will find on the session page also GitHub link where you find all the material, where you can copy paste things for your session. So if you follow that. And since this is a recorded session, we will lively attend and will answer questions here when you have some doubts on certain things. But well, there we are sure that we keep the time. Anyhow, we are always live available for any feedback you need. In general, just an overview here of our intelligent enterprise. We are talking here about the business technology layer where we are in, and actually we are quite deep inside the business technology platform with our HANA environment. On top of that, you need tools to work with that, and that's what we're looking today. You need Business Application Studio to create content. That's one way to do that. And we will show 2 different aspects of that, and I hope you will enjoy what we are doing. And this the whole stack is much higher, and you will have seen low code, no code, and integration with S4 and what you have. But we are going today very deep into the HANA stack. So again, here are some links with technical stuff, and with that, I'm going to the recording, and we'll start that. And I hope you enjoy what we have prepared for you. Thanks very much, and let's know through the chat when you have problems. As usual, we are starting here with the SAP BTP trial side. We are going into our database to check whether our database is running. We go to our account. In my case, I called my sub-account trial. So if you don't have that, you should have done that. It will take a while. So you should have done that. I have a trial here. And within the trial, I have a space called a dev space. And in this dev space, you will then see here my HANA Cloud. And you should have started this HANA as well. So we go to our Cloud Central to see, we have to sign in here. So we see our database, it's running. If it's not running, you can start it here. So there is a stop. When you're not started, you can upgrade and delete. So this is our database. The only thing we can do now from here, sensible, is we are going into Database Explorer to have a view into the database. So we are on our database and we are opening an SQL console. We are seeing who we are on this database. So in the moment we are asking who is the current user. And since we are coming from the
web page and the administration side, we are seen as DB admin. And we will see later that we will get other users and other roles within this database. We are back here in our environment. So we go back to our trial account here. And if we go home, we can choose Business Application Studio. So doing that, when you haven't done anything before, you start with a blank environment here, and you are asked to create a dev space to continue. So let's do that, create a dev space. So he has a few suggestions on main topics. So we take the HANA native application development. We will call this our workshop 3_1. So the name is correct. We can do that. You could also choose additional objects here on the right side, but right now we keep it plain, straightforward, and go ahead. So we are going here and create our workspace. He will immediately start the workspace. In the trial, you are allowed to have 2 of those and 1 at a time running. So you can start and stop that after a certain time of not usage. This will anyhow be stopped, but it will save the state you are in. You're not losing anything. So let's go from there ahead. I'm going to a slide right now to explain how we are changing database structures. Your DDL, data definition language, is how you create a table, create a sub procedure, alter a table, alter sub procedure, create a view. Whatever you do there, you can do on the schema, and it's absolutely fine to do that on HANA. What your task is when you do this, you are in charge of all the change management of your DDL. So when you add something, a new column to your table, you have to make sure that the modification of your DDL is also accepted from the database, and most likely you want to also preserve the data in the database. So you have to have some thoughts on how you're doing that. Typically, there are tools which help you generate this DDL. Then we have a second case where the lead of the Ddl generation is within tools. In SAP world, one absolute typical candidate is the NetWeaver stack with its DDIC, where the DDIC is generating the SQL for the database. So you have a kind of API or UI where you define your data structures, and then the framework is taking responsibility. NetWeaver is one, Hibernate is another one, SQL Alchemy is the Python one. So whatever you do when you have a kind of framework, again, you're going to a schema. You are in control, or your framework is in control of your DDL and your changes of your DDL, and that's good. Within HANA, we have something which we call design time artifacts, which describe what the HDI should do, and the Hdi container finally contains in a special schema. It's just a different schema type, the content. But the management of the schema content is done through the design time objects. And they can be handcrafted or they can be generated. So today in the first session, we do handcrafted design time objects and use Git to exchange that. And we do that with 2 methods. There is a Hdb table way to do that on the design time. And the second concept we call Hdb Migration Table. So what we are going to do today, we will create a dev space and a project in SAP Business Application Studio. We call it BAS, Business Application Studio. And then I want to create a table. It's an inventory table just to have some data in it, some volume. We will import the data in the Database Explorer that has the capability. And then we come to the topic we are really doing today. I will show you how we will create the table and how we change the table and add 2 columns to this table. And then we do a second round doing the same thing. We will change this structure, this time with Hdb Migration Table. And finally, we create some roles, since Jan will need some data access, and we will define the data access in these roles. Going back to our environment, IDE is running meanwhile. So we are opening it. And you will find a complete empty environment. What this is a kind of little Linux shell, which is I call it always the sibling or the twin brother of Visual Studio Code. It's nearly the same thing in its behavior, but it's coming out of the cloud. It's running in the cloud, and we are able to update that from our side, and we will obviously provide tooling here inside this, which you cannot get for various reasons in Visual Studio Code. So what we do is we start from template and we start with a new project. So the easiest way to do that, we are going to take our wizard here right now. Depending on what you have chosen, the templates are given. So we create a database template. We say start. What is the name of my template? We call it workshop 3.1. And we have a database module we will call DB. We're not using namespaces. We don't use schema names. We take HANA Cloud. And we will bound our database module with the Cloud Foundry service. So the Cloud Foundry of SAP is going to help us to connect to our database and is helping us to create our HDI folder. For that, we have to register on the Cloud Foundry, and for security reasons, we have separated this. So this is totally independent from our acknowledgement to the IDE here. So I'm going with my email. And my password. I at SAP have to give this also a token. I have to look up. And this will now bind me to my Cloud Foundry organization. Actually, you see I have several. So if you are entitled for several things, you can have various ones. But right now we are good with our trial environment. We have our space here, which is our dev space, all good. And we will have a name for our container, which is unique. We could have just the first thing to have it maybe even common with others, but I prefer to have my unique ones to avoid any confusion on the content which is in my container. And what's happening now, he is generating the database HDI folder. So that's registered in the cloud. The cloud knows now, or whether the service broker, as it is called, knows now where is the database I want to go to. It will create 2 users, a design time user and a runtime user. And with those, we will generate our structures, and we will also look into the structures themselves. This users I will show you later you can have access to if you have the rights. Obviously not everybody should have that, and that's also being used later on if you add an application to that, so that we have a secure access, nobody else can see that. And you will see later on, if I'm going with dbadmin into this, I would not even see the data, because that is one of the beauties, and sometimes people are saying, why can I not see data in my HDI container? But this is part of our security concept. We have to raise the curtain explicitly, and only the runtime user can see the data here. So he wants to remark the password here, but we don't do that. So we already started here. We have our workspace here. He has created a DB folder with some content inside. We have some git ignore stuff here where we see certain things being ignored, and we do have our project. I can move that a little bit up. So we are going to our database with the Hdi container. And if we are going here, we are using the runtime user looking at this. So if we open now the Database Explorer, it will add for us a profile here, which is the runtime user profile. So we take the same expression here, open for our new database, and see which current user we are. So we are seeing now we are connected with the runtime user. So in the background, the system handles the various users. You don't have to worry about that. But in case you're wondering why various aspects are giving you different results, you really have different users here. So, and with this let statement, you can verify who you are on the system itself. Okay, so let's go back. First of all, we want to create a table called inventory. I have a script book where I copy things. You will have that in your booklet as well, so you can grab that from there. So we create a new table here, and we can do that if you're totally new to the system. Just again, if you're not having followed the first session, there is an F1 key, and that gives you, similar to Visual Studio Code, all the functionalities. If you type HANA, you will find your Create HANA Database Artifacts wizard. And with this wizard, we want to see where do we want to save things. We are in the source folder, that's fine. We are HANA Cloud, but we want to have something with table. And what we want to have is the HDB table construct. And we call that, specify the artifact name. It's called inventory. All with a little I. Inventory. What we now have is a table called inventory, but it doesn't have anything here yet defined. So I do a copy paste. To get the code we need here, you just go into the workbook, copy and paste, and that should work. I may get some more format stuff here, so that looks a little bit better from my copy pasting. And the IDE is very, very graceful. It stores it already. And I'm moving that a little bit aside to read some more stuff here. So what we see now for my project, the table is not yet deployed, but it's pending deployed. I can deploy that here, but I can also go that for the whole project. The whole project will automatically see what objects are there, what objects are not there, and builds a complete list, and also will remove things. Here you just have individual deployments. So we will do that here, and we will deploy this table. So it will call our environment to build the table. If we are going now to our database, I'm going on table, and I have obviously to do a refresh, but you see already inventory is there. We are going on inventory, and it should be 29 columns if I'm not wrong. Yes, 29 columns, and we have our table here. And then we look into the data, and you will see it has no data in, so it's empty, and we have to fill the table with data. So for that, we are going out of this perspective, and we are going on our table inventory and use a function import data. Before we do that, we have to import the data. So we are now going to download sample data. That's in your workbook with a link to the GitHub. to our subsamples, HANA Cloud Learning, you will find a document here which you can download. It's a zip file you have to unfold. It's about 45,000 rows of data. I'm doing that. It's storing that on my home directory or my downloads directory. So I have a sample data zip file. We will need the data, so I unzip the data. Let's go back to our environment. Okay, we are going on inventory and we are starting to import data here. So we know we want to have normal data. We choose our data from our directory. Our downloads directory is going to have our demo data for inventory. So it will now go to step 3. It will compare the column labels with my labels and will match them. So we made everything right. So everything is equal left to right side. So we don't have to bother around things. So we're going to the very end of this wizard here. So we have to go to step 5, save all successful rows and list the errors. So that's the way we are going to do it. And let's finally define what we are doing. So we start the import to database, and he will start now to load the data. This is a very intensive process because he's storing every set in a single manner to identify all potential errors. So if you're very sure you can have all the data in one go, there are other methods to do that. But right now we are going the safe way. So the data is there and we can go back to our tables. Then we go to our data. And now we are going again to our Open Data tab. And to have that a little bit, so you see already some data is there. So what we want to see is, for example, what we can see is we have the x-axis and the label axis. The label axis, sorry, is the x-axis, and the value axis is the y-axis. And we want to see, for example, how many products we have in counting. So we want to have the product here on the x-axis, on the y-axis. We want to see how many values are there. So the product count is about this 44,000. That's good. And now we are interested, for example, how is that distributed over the regions? So you can see HANA is sorting that now. And we can see that group by. So if you're interested in the SQL, you can also see this here in the SQL set and can continue with this. At this very point in time, I'm doing a little break, about 2-3 minutes. I'm ready for questions you have or you want to catch up with things. We are coming back in about 2 or 3 minutes, and we then continue with changing our structure. So, okay, we are back. We opened bus, we created a table, we imported data. The next step we are doing is we are changing our structure. So to do that, we have our construct Hdb table. And the way we're doing it with Hdb table is we're just adding 2 columns to that. And we're now going to change our inventory table. And in HDI, the way to do that is very simple. You just go at the end of your table. So we have 2 columns. One is an additional attribute string and an additional attribute string not null, both 10. And if you add a normal attribute, you're fine. If you want to have a not null field, the database is saying I have to have a value here. So the easiest way to overcome this is to provide a default value. I'm putting in test here. You typically would have an empty string or whatever if you want to have a not null field, or you have default, whatever you want in this. So if I'm looking at the syntax, I have to be careful to add another comma here to have a complete syntax. But with this, everything is fine. And I give some more space here so that we can see what he's doing. And we do another deploy. Now he will automatically change the structure. You will see that in a moment. I will show you. So we changed the table, and we can see in the log file using existing table inventory from former owner, and the table structure was changed. There is a so-called migration running, and the table inventory contains data. So it will create the table and copying the data. All this takes not more than 2 seconds. So you can see when you are inside the database, data movement, data copy is relatively fast. And we have created a new structure with 2 additional fields, and we have copied over the data. So to prove that, we are going again to our table here. We kill all these fields because they are a little bit outaged. We are going to table. He is caching things, so we have to refresh the knowledge here. So if we go on this one here, we should now have 31 columns. And indeed we have, and we see that it is not null, and we see the default value as well. So if we go again to the data, we can now, rather than taking the product ID in the analysis, we can also take now, because we have each time a value inside, we can take our attribute. On the value exit, it will do the count on the values, and the result is the same as if we take the products, and we could again see that over the regions. It should come with the exact same result as if we take the product, if we are not grouping by products. So the result is the same. We have data, all is fine. Okay, let's look again to review. So we have changed our table, but you have seen slightly at least that we are copying data. So the data copy is something is bearable for smaller structures, 40,000 rows, nothing to worry about. But if you have in the millions, billions of rows, you certainly don't want to have a HDB table with the table migration. And therefore, we found a real dedicated structure called Hdb Migration Table, which is a different way to act, which allow us to convert the table in a way the database is more graceful and consumes much less resources. I'm going to a slide to explain that in general. So what we have done is HDB table. The lower thing, what happens, just it's pseudocode. It's not exactly what's happening, but that you get an idea. So person in this sample will be renamed to temp person. We will create the new structure, and then we will copy the data from the temp structure into the new structure. And finally, we'll drop the table temp. This will give us a copy of the data. We don't lose the data, but as you see, it's not a very resource-friendly way. You twice store the data, at least for a short time. You even have data in transit, so potentially you have 3 times the volume here. So nothing you really want. And the database is smart enough to do things like alter table. But how can we tell the database to do alter table? And this is what we're going now. We will add 2 more attributes, but we use the alter paradigm, and we use another concept which we call Hdb Migration Table. So let's continue there. Rather than doing our inventory table here, we will do a copy of this table. That's very nice to do here. There is a duplicate and it does an inventory copy, HDB table, but we have to rename this thing and we rename it by Hdb Migration Table. And it will not be a copy because it's a new ending, it's a different file. So we can simply have that here. And now we have two inventories. It's the same content. So if we would run this as a full deployment, he would come to confusion because we are saying on one side we want to generate this as HDB migration table, and on the other side we want to run this as HDB table. So the thing when I'm deploying this overall will come to an error. I will do that just to prove it. Go ahead. And there he is already. He says, no, 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 I don't want this. This is not good for me. So give it another try. Just to see that. So he's not very happy with this. And transaction rolled back, internal error. So that's really not working for him. The reason is we have the inventory twice. So to overcome this problem, and hopefully we haven't destroyed our data yet. No, we haven't. We add the neutral element of our deployment files, which is a text file. So we rename the HDB table to HDB table.text. Now we have a valid migration table. The only thing, it is not fully a version which is compliant with our way how that has to be a migration table. So we have to say equals version equals 1. So a migration table has versions and it has to know which version is current and which migration steps have to follow. Right now we haven't changed anything. We just changed the way we have an HDB table to become an HDB migration table. So we changed our way of creating things. The good news is you can do that yourself, even if you have existing tables already there. So if you want to change from HDB table to HDB migration table, you can do exactly the same thing as I just did it. And then you are on the HDB migration table pattern and continue then on HDB migration table. And by the way, this is also working in the other way back. So you can toggle between migration table and normal table, forth and backwards. So let's see if this is all working. So we deploy again. So we haven't seen that it's good, but it worked fine. So we are good with this. And yeah, I was too fast clicking. So let's go on the database side. We are going here. And we are going on our table. And we are going on refresh. And we are going on inventory. And we are still there. So the data is, the structure is still there. So let's hope that the data is also there. We go to analysis and go to product and go on the value axis. And still we have 44,000 there, so we are good, all fine. We survived our migration to migration table. Yeah. So now we want to have another 2 lines of code. I'm just wait another few moments for you to catch up. If you have problems yet to follow up, ask questions, and we will continue in about 3 minutes. So we want to migrate our inventory to a version 2 with 2 additional columns. And for that, we will create us a copy again of this migration table. And we will take out the existing one here in the way that we say, oh, this is version 1.txt. And our new one here is obviously not the copy any longer, but the original inventory. And what we will have is version 2, and version 2 will have additional 2 columns. We will rename our version now to version 2. Rename to version 2. And what we will do is we will add 2 more columns to this and add here a comma and the 2 lines. So we have now 2 more columns for version 2. It doesn't fit really on the screen, but there you are. So that's our new table with another integer and an integer not null with a default value 0. So this is, if you deploy this new, you will have version 2. But you have already version 1. So you have to tell them as well how to get from version 1 to version 2. So we are going again to our little scrapbook and add something additional. And we'll have also a migration to reach version 2. So whatever other migrations versions are there and whatever migration steps are needed. In this case, it's very simple. We have version 1 inside the system. We want to get to version 2, and these are the steps to go further. So we will add a table, add a column, alter table, add column, alter table, add column, and we will get the same. So what the system will do is it will smoothly add these 2 columns without doing massive data operations, and then we have a change of the structure. And hopefully the time is showing us as well that this is working well. So we deploy the new function here. And maybe you have recognized already it was quite fast. So let's look where we have the change. So there we are. So rather than 2 or 1.5 seconds, he's doing that now in 200 milliseconds because he does not need to convert the table. So he sees there is an existing table inventory and he has to do something to change this. So this is giving us another 2 columns and we want to prove that again. So we go back. He's caching all this information. So we have to say refresh here because that's nothing you do every day, changing your structure. So we open our inventory and we should have now 2 more columns at the end. Indeed, we have add integer and an integer not null. Now that we have done and changed successfully from table to migration table, we have to access them. Therefore, we are building 2 roles, one with grant and the other without grant permissions. That is necessary for my colleague Jan when he wants to access these data with his calc views. So being back in our BAS environment, we want to now have 2 roles defined. So I'm going on our source directory F1, and we want to create database artifacts. Same folder, but we want to have a role. Hdb role is the right thing. Specify we want to have inventory with grant. And we want to have, because it's a grant, we will have to add a hash, but not inside the file name, but later inside the object itself. So we are going to go our object with grant. The role name has to be edited to add a hash after the role name. If you have privileges with grant, you have to have a role name with a hash. So we want to have with grant, we want to go on object, we want to go on inventory, we want to have choose a privilege. There we are. Select. So that's what we want to do on this, and we close it. And a second one, we are going again to the F1 object. Again, we want to have a role. And we call that simply inventory here. Create. We'll do the same thing. We're going on object privileges. We are picking our inventory. And from that, we are going to say we want to have a select statement here. And then we are good. Overall, we want to have a deployment of everything. So let's see if it's running through. All good. So we have our roles also now attached to that, so that Jan later on his session can work with this for his calc view. So at this point in time, we do a pause, and I'll leave you 1-2 minutes to catch up, to ask questions, and then we continue. The last thing we want to do is we want to bring all this into our Git environment. So we have to connect to Git, and we want to join that with the Git world. So let's see that we go to the Git world, and there is a Git world. So we make a new repository, workshop 3_1. Seems to be a valid name. We want to make that private. And we create the repository. So he gives us some advice here how to do that properly. So we will do that step after step. So you go into your GitHub profile on settings, and you scroll down to developer settings. And then you can have your personal access tokens. And I have several here defined, but I just declare a new one here. So we generate a new token. We have to sign in to do that. We have to give the token a name. My new token. And then you can say how long should it last. So if you want to be very secure, you're just working 30 days with it, or you take one which is not expiring, which obviously has certain risks. And what we want is we want to work on the repo, so that's fine. You might want to also delete. I'm not doing that, so, and I don't have any admin stuff. I don't have any other things here, so I'm fine. We want to have maybe access notifications, and with that we generate a token. So a token is now generated. You see that only once, and I would not save this here, or I will delete that. So that's not existing any longer, even if you copy that. You can copy that yourself here by copy, and then put it in your key management or somewhere else. This is the last time you see that. And if you want to have a new one, you have to regenerate a new token here, or you have to create a complete new one. So once the token is disappearing here, it will vanish. So I understand that I delete this token. So that's gone again, and it doesn't help you at all because it's not any longer there. So this is how you generate a token. More on tokens, obviously, at GitHub, because that's their stuff. For our purpose, I think we are fine here. And with this token, we can later on connect our results with the repository here. So finally, we go back after we have created our token to the bus environment, since we want to continue there with our Git access. So we are going back to bus here. So we let Git know that we want to work with Git. So we do in Git init. So it will initialize. We have to get all our changes into our local branch. So we do something like first commit and add everything to our local environment. So that's good. Now we have to get back from Git. We have to let Git know that we have a remote connection. I'm using the HTTPS. So we are going here. We're doing this. So we have this. Now we can do a Git fetch. And he's asking now for our username. So that's good. Username is this. And the password or token. And I'm entering now my token from my Git side. And would you like to save this for the future use? We will do that. So it's saved. So, and now we can do also get something out here. And this is with this one. So we do a push and we get our objects over to the other side. Yeah, so you might consider to change the name from master to main or something else. But right now the defaults here are given with master. For political correctness, we should go to main in the future. And by this, yeah, just if you have not seen, so you can do a git config -- list, and there are some parameters there. The important thing is that you give in your username and your email to this, so that the Git side knows who you are and what you want. The token is stored secretly, so you don't have to worry about that one. So other than the SSH method, this is easier to use at the end, but you should then also be sure that when you go on the Git side, use the HTTPS rather than the SSH method. That we double check that every content is here. Indeed, we are over. We have our migration table here, and we are in version 2. And we will do a final lookup on our PowerPoint to see what have we done today. We opened a dev space in a project and created a project. In this project, we created a table called inventory, and we imported the data. So we did an HDB table and created the data and imported the data. Then we changed the structure and added 2 columns to the table, and just simply in HDB table and deployed that. Internally, the HDI environment will kind of copy the table to a table with the new structure. You want to have a smarter solution. Therefore, you can have a Hdb Migration Table where you also define the table structure, but you give it a version, and you below that describe the migration steps from the previous version to the current version. Or if there's no previous version, the upper definition contains the full new table construct. Finally, you give the roles, and at the end, we synchronized all this with Git on a basis with GitHub and a token. From this, we are heading over to our next session.
If there are no other questions in the chat at the moment, perhaps I comment a little bit on the role with a hash. The idea is that in the next, in my part, we are creating a calculation view on tables. And if you want to create a calculation view on tables, you need the object owner needs select with grant on the underlying object, like the table, which means we have to grant the select on the table with grant option. And if you want to do something like that in a role with the grant option, then you need to add the hash at the end of the role name. For the application user, we only need select on the underlying object. And because of that, Volker created a second role without the hash, which has no grant option in it.
There's just another question. My personal recommendation is to always use Hdb Migration Table because that gives you various advantages. First of all, your change of your tables is much smarter and less memory intensive. And if you have these tables which have multiple million rows, that's certainly easier and less intensive in memory and also in time. So we have seen on large tables long deployment processes. So we better go on Hdb Migration Table, particularly on large tables. But in general as well. And if we look for upcoming topics like various data temperatures and where you want to partition tables, a partitioning of the table is only sensible on Hdb Migration Table. And therefore, that's another very good reason to go to Hdb Migration Table, because then you can build up partitions with page loadable, and you can leverage the size of your HANA not only from the RAMs, from the RAM side, but also can use your disk storage we have with a HANA. So if you go on a HANA trial, you have 30 gigabyte of RAM, the smallest version, and 120 gigabyte of disk. So you can store much more volume if you partition your tables. Obviously, that pays with the performance in excess. But if you, for example, take the date, then you have another good option to do that. But this is a topic for a next session. We are preparing already. So with that, I'm continuing here with Jan's session. Seems we have no further questions. So I'm going ahead.
So the first thing that we should make clear is that we start our trial database. As you probably know from the other workshop sessions, the trial instances will be shut down overnight. So we have to start them every day again. So let's just do that. We are here on the central page and we go to our trial account. In the trial account, we go to our sub-account trial. We select our spaces, the dev space. We go to the HANA Cloud part first, to the HANA instance. And we go to the Open in SAP HANA Cloud Central. And you see now the database has been stopped overnight. So we just started by going to these three dots and say start. Now this will take a little bit of time. Hopefully you have already done that in advance of this session. If not, this is now the right time to do it. And while the database is coming up, I will talk about what will happen in this session. This workshop is in general on collaborative settings. So the idea is, how do people work together on a project? And in this special session, we are now focusing on how do you work in a team on a certain project, and how can you make sure that not everyone in the team has to reinvent the wheel by defining some synonyms, defining services, and so on. So the outcome of this session should be to give you an idea of how you can create a template project, and in this template project, already prepare some services and create some synonyms so that the colleagues of you can then reuse the template and don't have to do the same thing again and again, so they can build up on your work. Of course, in this session, we cannot focus on every aspect of it. I mean, you will have certain tables that we don't know about. You will have some requirements, perhaps from security perspective. But what this session should give you is a general idea of what options you have to prepare a template so that others can work with it. If we look at it from a high level, what will happen in this session? So in the very beginning, we will create an empty Git project. This will be the project in which we work and that we will later share. Actually, what I will do in this session is, after I've created the template project and synchronized it with the Git project, I will invite my colleague Chris to use this template project to create his own work. And this will hopefully illustrate to you how easy it is then, if a template is already there, to reuse it, and especially how fast Chris can get productive by simply building on the template that I have provided to him. Now, after creating the Git project, we will create an empty project in our Business Application Studio. This is where we will work in. Then we will move over to HANA Database Explorer, where we will create some roles and database users that we will need later for doing the assignment of the privileges. These roles and services and database users then can be reused by my colleagues. In this case, it will be Chris. In Business Application Studio then, we will enhance our template project. We will create Hdb grants files. We will create Synonym and prepare everything for the service. And finally, as hinted at before, we will synchronize the project with the Git project, and then I will hand it over to Chris so that he can show how he would now develop based on this template. We now go back while the database is still starting up. We go back to our trial home, and now we dive into the Business Application Studio part. So we start Business Application Studio, or at least now the offering of the development workspaces. So for you, the screen will probably look a little bit different. For me, I'm asked directly to create a new dev space. If you have already created dev space, please still also create a new one. Name it WS3_3 and choose the template of the HANA native application. This means you're now selecting a subset of extensions that are typically useful in the context of developing HANA database artifacts. Of course, you could also select additional extensions, but keep them empty for the moment so that we all work with the same kind of extensions here. Press Create Dev Space, and then also the dev space will be created. While this is created and started up, perhaps some small short comments about the dev workspace. The idea is that you get an environment in which you develop, and you can adapt this development environment to your needs. So you can add certain extensions and make it comfortable for you to work in. Now, while this is still starting up, let's go to a Git Provider. So here we will create an empty project. So I go to new repository and I call it also WS3_3. So this will be the template project that we are using, and I make it private and I say create repository. Now, this is something that I will need later, the Git URL. So I copy that so that I can reuse it in Business Application Studio to synchronize this template. I keep the tab open because I will switch back and forth in the following. Now the workspace is running, so I start it up. And now, because it's a new workspace, or development workspace to be more precise, nothing is in because I just created it. Now I have different options what I can do. I can, for example, clone from Git. Would at the moment not make very much sense because my Git template is empty, so I would have an empty project. I could import it from the file system, or I can start from a template, and this is what I will do now. So I click on Start from Template, select the database project option, say Start, provide a name for this project, WS3_3. I click Next. I keep the default of the DB module. I don't want to have a namespace, which would be prefixed for every object afterwards otherwise. And I just take also the default that I want to bind to a database module. So I take Next, and now I have to log in with my email address and my password. Now, after I'm authenticated, I will see the spaces for which I'm authorized. In a trial account, I'm authorized for the dev space. If you remember, when we started the database instance, we worked in the dev space actually. Now, if I'm fine with all the default settings, which at the moment I am, I press Finish. And now the service is created that belongs to this container. First of all, a container is created. Then a HDI service is created, connected with the database container, and all the settings are prepared so that I can afterwards work in this project and create my database artifacts there. So this will take a little bit of time. For us all to synchronize again, I would suggest that we make a very short break. This break, you have now the option to ask questions to Volker, to me, or to Chris, and we are happy to answer your questions. Of course, if you just want to relax for some minutes till the database is or the project has been created, of course, you can also do that. See you soon. Now that the project has been created, the workspace has been opened, and you are now in your workspace WS3_3. You have a database module, and you can already build your project here. Obviously, it's an empty project. You have not created any objects there, so it would be still be empty. What we do now is that we synchronize this empty project with our Git account or Git project. So we go here to the source control option, and we say add. First of all, we add all the stage all the changes. So we click on plus. We enter a commit message, for example, initial commit, and press the commit button. Now we select a remote branch. So we add remote. And here's where we have to copy, or we copy our Git URL that I mentioned before. So if you don't have it, you would have to go back here, take it from there, and put it here. And give the remote name, remote source a name like main. And now I have to enter my Git user and my password or token. I don't want to save these credentials, so I take the option save for this session only. I don't want to have a periodic fetch run, so I say no. Now I can push to the branch, so I go to the 3 dots and I say now push to, and I select the main that I have just defined as the Git repository. So just for a kind of illustration, if I now go to my Git project here, so I reload the page, you will see now the files that have been created in Business Application Studio. So the project structure basically is now synchronized with this Git. Coming back to our flow graph here, we have created an empty Git project. We have created an empty project in Business Application Studio. And the next step that we want to do now is we want to make sure that we want to create some roles, database users, so that we can assign the privileges. And what we will do is it's a pretty generic way of doing it. So we will create 2 generic roles, and these generic roles will be assigned to the project then later, which means if I want to enrich the project with additional privileges, all that I have to do is to grant these privileges to these 2 roles. So long sentence, let me just show you, and then I repeat that sentence again, so to make sure that I clearly expressed what the intention behind this setting. So I said we want to go to Database Explorer, so I press F1. While I'm on focus of the Business Application Studio, I press Database or enter Database, Data, so that the Database Explorer option comes available, and I select it. Now the Database Explorer is opening up. Okay, you will also have your dbadmin user here connected to your instance, so we will work with the dbadmin user. If you right-click on it and select Open SQL Console, a console will be opened, and you will work now with the dbadmin user, which means you have the privileges of the dbadmin user. This is important in this context because we need a user who is allowed to create roles and also to assign roles. This requires something like a privilege role admin. dbadmin has the privilege role admin, so we can work with this user. Obviously, if you want to use that in a more productive environment, you probably would create your own administrative user with these privileges. Now, what do we do first? We create 2 roles. Now, you can either follow me while I type them, or alternatively, you go to the additional material and you can copy it from there. The statements that I will use in the following are not very long, but probably it's more comfortable to copy and paste them here. So the first thing is that I will create a role. Actually, I also copy and paste it so I don't do a typo. The first thing is I create a role and I call it generic role for OO. The OO stands for object owner, and it should become clear later what is meant with it. For the moment, just see it as a role that will be assigned to a technical user later. So I mark that and press F8. Alternatively, I can press the run button so that it's executed. Now the role is generated, and I create a second role. The second role is the application user. So I call it AP, and the role is created. Now, with these 2 roles, I will later be able to authorize the object owner and the application user of the project. This is now a more or less logical construct in the project, which means the object owner is the one who creates the views, for example. If you create a calculation view, the object owner will be the object owner of the project that we address with object owner in the project. If you do a data preview, then this is done by a user that we address logically with the application user in the project. And these 2 roles are the roles that we will assign to these 2 logical users of the project. Now, the object owner, which is creating the views, needs the privilege for the underlying objects on which the view should be based. So if I want to create a calculation view on a table, I need select with grant on the table. In the past, if you worked in HANA repository with HANA Studio, for example, then this object owner was sysrepo user. So you had to grant the privileges to the sysrepo user. In an HDI environment, there is not such a user like sysrepo, but we have smaller users per container. So in each container, you have a kind of sysrepo user that is only relevant for this container. And we address this user with the logical term object owner. And I will show you later how this is actually done, how you address this technical user. The application user is the one that is doing the data previews. So here it makes sense to grant select on the objects, which the developer should work on. If you want to be more strict, you can also simply grant select metadata on the objects so that the developer cannot see the data itself. Good. So we will grant now these privileges to the respective privileges to these roles. And as I said, as it is set up now means whatever privilege I will grant to this role will be assigned later to the object owner automatically, or if I grant it to this role, to the application user. And how this will be automatically be done, this is something that we will define in the project in Business Application Studio. Now, let's grant the respective privileges that we will need. In the workshop with Volker, you have already created 2 roles. These roles give access to the container that you have created in the first session. If you are not sure what was exactly the name, what you can do is you can just execute the following query, select the role schema name and all other fields from roles where the role name equals inventory. This assumes now that you followed the naming convention of Volker where you had the name inventory in it. In my case, I see now that there has been a role created. It has been created in a schema name ws3_1 and then the typical default extensions of the container. So this is the role that I want to assign to my object owner or to my application user so that these technical users of my project can make use of the container of Volker. I have prepared these statements, so you probably also want to copy and paste it in case you have somehow renamed it differently, you have a different role schema name, or you have a different name for the role, you have to adapt it. But the important point is that you grant the role that has been created in the session from Volker with a hash, which has select with grant options on the container to the generic role for OO that we've created here. And you grant the inventory role, which simply provides select without the grant option to the generic role for AP. So I mark it and I execute it. And now these 2 roles have contain the privileges that allow to report or even to build calculation views on these tables that have been created by Volker. Now we have just the roles, but somehow we want to get the roles into our project. For doing that, we create a database user. So again, I copy and paste the statement. The database user will be called UPS grantor. We give it a password, and we say the password should not be changed on the first logon. Otherwise, we would have to change it immediately anyway. So I execute it, and we have the database user. Now, the purpose of this database user is that this database user can grant these roles that we have enriched with these privileges in the project to the respective logical users like object owner and application user. Again, I copy the statement, so I grant the generic role to the user provided service grantor here that I've created with admin option, which means this user is allowed to further administrate this role, meaning can grant this role to other persons. Similarly, for the RP role, also the UPS grantor is allowed to grant this role to other persons. So I execute both. And now we are finished in setting up the authorization context. And the next steps are only then in Business Application Studio. We will make use of these roles. We will make use of this database user. And if we wanted to enrich the privileges later, we would simply grant the additional privileges to these 2 roles, and we would not have to adapt anything else in the project in Business Application Studio afterwards. So this is a pretty simple way of enrich then the privileges that you use in your project. So let's have a look again at where we are. We have created the SQL roles, database user, and now we are entering the Business Application Studio again and prepare the HB grants files, create a synonym, and add the service. Before we do that, I offer to have another round of questions and answers, or simply have a short break. See you soon. Now we are in Business Application Studio again. And here we switch again to our Explorer view. And the first thing that we now do is we add a user-provided service. The user-provided service will be the service which is later granting the privileges into our project. So I first build my project the first time here. And now I add a database user-provided service. So I click here on Add button. We don't want to use an existing Hdi container, but we want to use or to create a user-provided service. If we already had a user-provided service, of course, we would not have to create it again. And this is exactly the idea that also your colleagues later who use the project are not creating the user-provided service again, but simply use what you already have created. But as you are creating the template, you create a user-provided service here. We give it a name, and for simplicity, I call it UPS generic. And I use the option to deploy to use the information from the target container. If I use this option, I don't have to enter which database this user-provided service should be connect to. And I only have to enter the database user and the password. If I selected the provide database information, then I would also have to list the database to which the user-provided service should connect. The username that I enter here is now the one that I created in the Database Explorer. So I copy it from here. And also the password I copy from here without the quotes. And with that, I can press the Add button. So when I press the Add button, what will happen is the user-provided service will be added here. You see here, it has been added as a new service. And it's also created at the same time. This was because I selected the option to create it. Now we have the connection with the user-provided service here, and we can use that service now in our project to grant some privileges. This is what we do next. So I click on the SRC folder, I press F1, and I type create database artifact. So as soon as you see HANA database artifact, it's fine, and you can select it. What I want to create is an Hdb grants file. So I select this one. And I call it generic. So I can say create. Now the file has been created, and if you click on it, you will see that it's a template in itself. And let's have a look at the section first. At the very beginning, you have the service that is used for this template. So what we will enter here is our user-provided service that we created. And this user-provided service will be used when this file is built to grant the privileges. So when I build the Hdb grants file, the service that I enter here will be used to grant the privileges that are defined in this file. Now this file has two major sections. One is the object owner. So if you remember, I talked about the logical object owner. So you don't specify the database user that is behind this. What you say is the logical owner or the logical object owner of this project should have the following privileges. And similarly, we have a logical description of the application users, which will run, for example, the data previews. And this is this section. So what I put in this section will be granted to the application users. What I enter in this section will be granted to the object owners. And this means now if someone else uses your project, even if it's a different container, the privileges will be assigned to the respective container because we don't code for the database users themselves, we code for the logical role that these users have. Now in the section for the object owner, we have different options what we can grant. So for example, we can grant system privileges, we can grant global roles, and so on. At the moment, we only want to grant the global roles, the tools that we created in Database Explorer, so I can delete the rest of it. This means in this case, from line 4 till line 9, I can remove it. We have to be careful that we also remove the comma, otherwise the syntax would not be correct. Then next, let's remove the rest that we don't need. From line 10, we take the comma and delete down till line 40. And now we enter the roles that we have created. So we just want to create the roles without admin option because the object owner does not have to administer the roles to the next one. So we will delete line 8 and the comma of line 7. I take the role name. So we had the generic role for OO. I copy it and paste it here into the quotes. I remove the comma and the next role. And now I copy this part, the global roles, including the bracket in line 9, so from line 5 till line 9, and copy it into the application user section as well. So what we have now is we have a section for the object owner, we have a section for application user. The object owner, we grant the global role, generic role for O. The application user, we grant the role, generic role for AP. So we have to change the name here a little bit and make it to AP. And the granting will be done by the user provided service that we added here, so UPS generic. So if you make that a little bit larger, you see it's UPS generic, how we named it. So when I press now the button to build this project, the user provided service generic will use the database user that we defined when we created this user provided service. This database user will be used to grant this role to the object owner and this role to the application user. So after I press this button, so with that, in this project, we are now already authorized to report on data that is contained in the container that was created by Volker. To do so, we create a synonym. So I click on the SRC, say new file. This time I want to create a synonym. So I just call it generic Hdb synonym so that the extension signals what I want to do. I want to create a new synonym. So I click on add. I call the synonym as inventory. And the object name I just search here. So I use the user provided service that I have. I press star so that all the objects that I have, I'm allowed to. So I use the UPS generic that we have added and press star and enter star so that I see now all the objects that the user provided service and the container service are providing. I want to have the inventory table from the workshop 1. So I just select this, double click on it, and it's entered here. So now the definition of the synonym is done and I can deploy it. Now, to show you that really something is created and a synonym is existing on which you could report already now, let's open the Hdi container. So this time I have now the option, I could go back to the Database Explorer and add the Hdi container here. I want to show you a different option. You can click here on this icon and with that open already the corresponding Hdi container. Takes a little bit of time. Perhaps this is the right time for you also to have another break, ask questions, give feedback. See you soon. you see your container has been opened and we have created a synonym. So let's have a look at the synonyms here. And you see the inventory synonym has been created. And if I go here and say open data, I will see the data that has been created by you and Volker in the last session. Now, just to recap what we have done, we have basically prepared a template which provides access to one table. Obviously, if you prepare a template, you want to have more synonyms pointing to more tables that your colleagues then can use. But with this simple example already, with one single table, I can now hand over this project to Chris, and Chris can start working on this table without having to define synonyms, without having to define services, and without having to take care about role creation or anything like that. So to illustrate this to you, I will now invite Chris to the project. So I go here to in my project, I go to settings and go to manage access. I have to enter my password. And now I invite a collaborator. So I invite my colleague Chris, and Chris will now get an email and will be able to check out my template project. In a more productive environment, you probably would want to fork your template so that the collaborators cannot change your template, but they work on their own Git project. But here for illustrative purposes, we just show you how now Git would, how Chris would handle this project and create a calculation view on top of the table. Before I hand over to Chris, I have to synchronize my project again with the Git account so that I can then hand it over to Chris. So we go to the source control Git here. We give it we stage all of the files, and we give it a commit message like, for example, template. And we click on commit, and we push it the main branch. And now, when I've just given access to Chris, let's look a last time on our side on what has happened. We have synchronized the new things. So you see now the Hdb grant file and the synonyms. And now with that, over to Chris. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Jan. All right, so as Jan said, I'm a developer in his team in our session today, and I want to work with the template project that he has created. And I'm in my GitHub right now, and I see his invitation to collaborate with him on his project. And if I click on accept invitation, I can see the project that you and Jan have created. And in there, I see all the objects you have created as well. So in order to clone from this project, I will need the HTTPS address of this repository. And here I am in my Business Application Studio project. As you can see, mine is completely empty. Since yours might not be, you can simply go to the welcome page to simulate the steps that I did, click on help and then welcome, and then you will see the screen here. There I will click on clone from Git to connect to the repository Jan has just shared with me. I will enter the URL here, enter my Git username and my token, opening the repository in my workspace. So here I can see all the objects Jan has created. And the first thing I want to do is create my own Hdi container in Jan's database. And therefore I click on bind here at the SAP HANA projects panel, press enter, enter my credentials. and select Jan's database. The space, and I can see everything has been set. Here I will create a new service instance. We'll keep this default name. And I will select the first of these two options here. And now you can see my container is being created. Okay, so now that I have created my container in the database, I will make use of the user-provided service that Jan has created. And for that, I will bind this cross-container service 1 here below. So I will select bind to the UPS generic service, and here you can see that's the one that Jan has created for me. And it has been bound. Now let me deploy this whole project to my container that I created. And Jan has assured me that the little error messages that were visible there are not to be worried about, so I won't, and start directly with my work. So since I'm a developer in Jan's team, I have the mission to analyze the data that is in his project, and I want to create a calculation view. And with all the objects and privileges and roles that Jan has created, I can directly start my work. So I will create a new calculation view. So I will select calculation view as the artifact type, and I will call this inventory analysis. Everything else can stay the same, and I will click on create. And here's my calculation view. If I double click that, I can see the calculation view graphical editor. And what I want to do now is in the data that shows inventory data and stock data of different products in different countries, I would like to find out what products in what countries are below a certain target stock number. And to do that, to do anything with this data, I need to first bring in the table into this calculation view. And I will start with a projection node where I will add the inventory data. So as the synonym is already there, I can just leave the target container service here as the service selected and type ** to see all the objects that are available to me. And here I can see the synonym as inventory that has the inventory data. Click on finish and I can see it in my projection node. Now I would like to map the columns that I want in the output, and I would like the product description, the destination country, the target stock quantity, and the on-hand stock. Now all of these columns are mapped to my output, and I want to now create a calculated column, which I can add here, clicking on the add icon. And I will call this stock below target. The data type should be an integer. And to add the expression, I will click here and then select the expression editor. Here I can see all the columns that I have already mapped to my output. And as I said, I want to find out if the on-hand stock is lower than the target stock quantity. This is what I typed in here with this expression. I can now close this projection node and connect it to my aggregation node. And here I will need to make sure that all my columns are mapped to the output of the aggregation node. So I can just double click here and all of them are mapped. And with that, I'm already done with my very simple calculation view that I wanted to do and deploy it. And now if I click on the data preview, I can analyze my data. And you can see I didn't have to worry about anything, no synonyms, roles, or grants. It all worked perfectly for me and using the service Jan has created for me. And this template allows me to easily do everything that I want to do in the calculation view here. So now to quickly analyze what came out of my calculation view, I'm going to add the destination country to the label axis and the product description, and then add my calculated column to the value axis. And then here at the types of graphs, I will select a heat map. And now I can quickly see what countries have stocks below a certain target of the different products. And my analysis is done. So now with this template project, I can continue my work with the data the way that I need it, and I don't have to worry about any of the privileges and roles and connections because this template allows me to easily do what I need to do. So with that, thanks, Jan, and back to you.
Thank you, Chris, for this great demo. I would just like to wrap it up now and mention how this fits all into a larger context than when we are developing. And to put that now all into place, what we did actually, we worked on a template. So as a project coordinator, so to say, there was a template created. Then there was a fork done, or we did not show this, but this would be what you probably would do in a productive environment. You would fork your template project so that another project is existing on which the developers are working. The individual developers are synchronizing with this Git project, working on it. They build on what has been already put as logic into the template. They can improve it and work on it. Now, if several developers are working on the same project, you probably don't want that the individual developers are consuming from each other. If you did something like that, it would mean, let's say, developer 1 is creating an object 1 and uses for this an object of developer 2. And now if developer 2 changes something, developer 1 would be affected by it. So because you don't want to have that, so that the developers can work in isolation and try things out, here's the concept of a reuse container. So what actually is done is, if a project wants to consume objects, these objects are not used or not taken from a developer container, but they are always using a reuse container. So if I, as a developer in a project, want to use an object of developer 2, I use this via the reuse container. So how this is possible is that I push my changes to Git. There's an automated job, as for example, Volker showed in the sessions, that is then deploying based on a certain criteria, like a certain branch or a quality sign-off or something like that, is then deploying to the reuse container from where I fetch my objects. In a nutshell, what it means is I can work here in isolation when I feel safe enough that what I have developed is ready for consume. Then I push it to a certain branch, or I have a quality check on a Git project. And when this is fulfilled, an automated job, for example, or manual decision can be done to deploy to the reuse container. So if someone wants to use my objects, this person is not using directly from my developer container, but always via the reuse container, so that there's a stable interface from where to consume. Also, if there are other projects from which you want to make use, in our example, it would have been Volker's project, then you would also not directly go to the developer container, which we actually did in this example, because we did not also introduce the additional complexity now of having an automated job, going to another container and so on. But in a more productive environment, you probably would also, for Volker's project, have an automated job that is deploying into a reuse container and consume only from the reuse container. With that, thanks for your attention, and over to the last question and answer round. Thank you.
So there had been several questions. The session is recorded and will be available for replay. The resources, the GitHub repositories with the source code you can use, copy paste and use in your project is also provided. So you can recap all this, particularly if you had not been able to get the HANA up and running. And yes, there is a question on blocks for Git architecture. We are looking for that one, as well as for working in common with various patterns there. So the one Jan showed today is also very important. And with this, I'm stopping here this video. I think there is still 2 minutes left. Not sure Jan will talk something at the end.
Yes, then I would just present 2 more slides, and
okay, I
then perhaps we have a last round on questions that have not been answered yet. If there are new questions,
exactly.
then
so I stop it here. I go back to the slides, and we continue here. So we have 2
okay,
slides.
perfect. Yeah, then I don't have to share my screen. That's perfect. Yeah, I mean, and basically this is just a hint to you that if you're interested in related use cases as of the things that we have discussed here, you might find here some resources for it. And Volker, if you move to the next slide, there's also about the learning opportunities that that you can have here at TechEd, and also accelerate your career by getting more and more proficient in these technologies. With that, I would say thank you also from my side for attending this session. We both know, Volker and me, that this is pretty difficult in a pure virtual setting. Also, especially in a workshop where you try to replicate what we are doing and so on. But we hope that with providing the material at the end and providing also the video as a replay, we can make life a little bit easier to you to get at the same information that we wanted, or to get the information that we wanted to share here. So thanks again. And Volker, do you want to say, perhaps we have a look at the questions, whether there are some new questions now?
Yeah, so I
now
will,
there are many.
Pardon?
No, I think many are coming. Oh yeah, okay.
So no, I think there is everything is clear from the question there. There is more topics to follow up. There's the topic of Geoman, which allows you in BAS to extend things and write your own templates. We have also added a new feature in BAS called guided development, which is also a template-driven thing. And all we are adding here to the function of BAS is something you as a consultant, as a developer, as an architect can also do in this environment. So that helps you also to speed up your organization or to enforce name conventions or enforce certain patterns if you add your own wizards here. And also there is another wizard or another tool, which is also working very nice together with BAS, and that is CAP, which generates you, for example, also Hdb Migration Table and does all the changes in the scripts automatically. Again, that is shown already in sessions out there. And we hope to make more next year. We're getting lots of nice features there. There was also mention of the scheduler. HANA Cloud already has a scheduler, so you can use that. It's not available through the HDI right now, but obviously with the rights granted out, you can do that outside of the HDI containers. There is we are working to get that also on the on-premise side. So SPS06 will have a scheduler. If you upgrade HANA 5 to SP5 to SP6, you will get the scheduler as well. And with that, we are looking forward to see you next session. Hope you got some inspiration here from what we have shown you, that you learned new things, that you are encouraged to dig deeper into other things. you might have not seen so far. CI/CD is one last thing I just recall. BAS, no, sorry, again, BTP has a CI/CD, and that can be used within BAS, respectively within via the Git. You can push to Git. There's a webhook, and BAS, then the BTP CI/CD will trigger an automatic build and deploy. So you can really start building complete automated things. You just send things out to Git, and everything at the end happens automatically with the deployment. So there are very nice features. Jan,
Perhaps,
anything else?
Yeah, perhaps one thing that I would also like to share here. I mean, we did not talk in detail about that, or I think we didn't mention it actually. In Business Application Studio, you have also the option to basically enrich your graphical environment by a Linux console, which means you have both worlds at the same time. So the ones who feel familiar with a graphical UI can work there with the graphical editors, but there's also an option to work with a Linux console, which means, for example, if you want to copy files, or especially if you want to work with Git, you can also use Git via the command line. And so either you do the Git via, as we showed here, with the graphical tooling, or you can also issue your Git commands on the command line. So you have both worlds, which also means, as Git is a kind of industry standard, you will find a lot of information about Git, how to use it by looking into the World Wide Web, which means then you get a lot of resources and you can just reuse them in the console by typing the commands, or you search for the corresponding buttons in the UI there.
Yeah. There are some other questions there. Security code scan you can build into BAS if you have the respective tooling there to run through your directories. As Jan just said, you have a kind of Linux access, and you can call other tools from that. You can do that also on the Git side. And oh, questions coming over and over.
Yeah, now it's becoming difficult to find one.
BW, I think we will not see that very soon in BAS, to be polite. Yeah, I don't see it coming, but you never know. Yeah, with that, I think we close the session here. I can only recommend. I'm just wearing the Summit T-shirt here, and I put it in my background. We have on December the 14th, 15th, also this time open a HANA Summit. I think the registration requests are now out. So if you want to have deep questions with the whole product management team, I'm leading the dev section there, and we have other things there about various aspects of HANA multi model development, and we have backup, recovery, security, and so on. So I can only encourage you to join our summit in December 14th, 15th. And with that, I hope you enjoy the rest of the show here, the rest of the TechEd, and hope to see you soon in the real world and not in this virtual environment. Thanks very much for joining.